Shalom and welcome to People on the Path. My name is Adam Lowy, and I am the lifelong learning Moreh Derech at Congregation Beth Sholom in San Francisco. Each month, I will welcome dynamic guests to discuss, learn, and consider what it means to be on the path. How does an individual's choices impact their path? How do the various communities that an individual participates in change their lives forever? What unsuspecting moments became the powerful ones that inform personal and professional journeys? Where does one's relationship to their Jewish identity take surprising turns, and how does it spiritually manifest? I intend for the conversation to be intimate, unscripted, and informal. The possibilities and potential will be infinite. The directions, ways, and paths will be explored, discovered, and open. So let us please take a walk together on People on the Path. And it has become a tradition for me to check in with our senior rabbi, Rabbi Dan Ain, before I introduce our guests. So Rabbi Ain.
Hello, 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 hello.
Shalom. Thank you, as always, for joining me on the path.
You know, it's a grower. Ever heard that expression? It's a grower. People on the path. It's a grower. Ever have it like you number 7 with a bullet? You ever hear that expression on like the top 40 countdown? You know what that means with a bullet?
No.
Well, a bullet means it's going up. It means that it's higher than it was in the previous rankings, and it's a grower. So your People on the Path, I'm hearing from more and more people. They're beginning to tune in. They're beginning to watch. They appreciate the guests that you've been bringing. They appreciate learning about different people's paths. So I'm excited to watch this path continue to develop that you are bringing to our community.
Thank you. So I guess the young people say that it's trending. Is it People on the Path?
That's
right. I think that's what they say.
Yes, I was actually teaching an introduction to Judaism. I don't know if I should share this. I was teaching an introduction to Judaism class last night, and I used the word fronting, and they laughed at it. So I still don't know why.
Awesome.
I still don't know why I was laughed at. Is that because it's from the 90s? Is that the deal?
I think, but
that's what they just chuckled. All of them just started laughing when I said
I wanted to ask you a question. In general, I like to know how you're doing, but I really want to know, as we settle into the darkest days of the year, how are you bringing light into your days and home right now?
Well, it's interesting. The number of people I come into contact with has been increasing. I think whether it's because COVID is easing, or whether it's because new mentality is kicking in, or whether it's because of the seasonality, for whatever reason, I was just thinking about this past week. I have been in touch with just a lot of people. I just seem to see a lot of faces, be in contact with a lot of people, and that just always fills me. Mm-hmm. It's very hard. COVID was hard for a lot of people. It was hard for me as well, not having community, not having interpersonal interactions. And I've been blessed this past week to have meetings with a lot of people, to be able to teach classes online and in person, and just the sheer amount of people who are coming to Beth Sholom, who are interested, who are engaged. That's really more so than anything else. Obviously, the winter is coming. It's going to get darker, and we're worried about health issues, but the more we can be together is the more I find the more potential for light.
Yes, relationships certainly bring the light, and I want to acknowledge that same thing, that the actual interaction with three-dimensional breathing human beings has been an uplift, and it is certainly lighting up my experience. I want to take this chance to see if there's any Beth Sholom offerings that you want to tell the community about that might bring light to the people in the next couple of weeks. We have some big.
Well, we're continuing to try to find new avenues and new pathways into worship, into prayer. So we have a new program called Rejoice that Rabbi Tzvi Bar David is going to be leading, which is through chant and meditation and Kabbalistic sacred music. He's going to find alternative pathways into prayer. You and David Israel Katz have your Explore program coming up in December, which looks really powerful. The idea of what are those heirlooms that are passed down and the power of intergenerational conversation. So I think that's going to be a special program. We also are going to be celebrating our centennial, which is going to be a huge thing for this community. We've been around for 100 years and we want to celebrate that. We want to look at who we've been. It's hard to move forward in this world without, well, it's not hard to move forward in this world. Everybody just moves forward to the next thing and doesn't. I mean, think about what it would be if we took stock and asked what we've done in the past 2 years. But no, we're going to plow full speed ahead. And, you know, maybe a lot of the problems that we have in society at large are because we don't stop and look backwards. And our community is dedicated to both tradition and innovation. And so we definitely want to innovate in all the ways that we've described. But we can't do that without first taking stock of who we've been and appreciating the values that we've carried that have helped get us through, and also to appreciate the ways that we've misstepped, to make sure that we don't do so. And we make sure that people in this city who maybe haven't before feel like they belong here at Beth Sholom. So that's to come. And I hope people join us for that. And of course, join us for Hanukkah and all the great offerings we have coming up.
Yep, Hanukkah Maccabee Mitzvah Day. It's coming. If you want to do some rededicating of the physical space, check out the website. Get involved.
Can you think of a better way? Can you think of a better way to celebrate Hanukkah?
Party, and then a great party to follow in person, outdoors at the plaza. Hanukkah festivities for all generations on November 28th, the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend.
So it's Wednesday today, Thanksgiving's tomorrow, correct? So I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, a happy Hanukkah, and I hope that you come and join us and celebrate the Chagim.
Awesome. Rabbi, thank you so much. I
look forward to your guest. I don't really know your guest other than meeting him on, you know, in athletic competition. So I don't really know his path or his story. So I eagerly anticipate hearing what you have to share with us. So thank you very much.
All right. See you soon. All right. Rabbi Ain will come back in a little bit to meet our guest. And our guest hopefully has turned his camera on. And I'm going to tell you who he is. This month's People on the Path guest is Seth Brisk. Seth Brisk is the Central Pacific Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Seth is ADL's representative to elected religious, civil rights and education leaders, technology influencers, law enforcement, and diplomats in Northern California, Utah, and Hawaii. Previously, Seth was the American Jewish Committee's regional director in Los Angeles, the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council Israel Center in Boston, and executive director of San Francisco Hillel. Seth served in the Israel Defense Forces and organized Palestinian-Israeli dialogue groups. He is a former cabinet member of the American Zionist movement, professional delegate to the U.S. State Department Advisory Committee on Religious Freedom Abroad, and a representative to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. In 2013, the Republic of Poland honored him as an officer of the Order of Merit. Seth played a critical role in passing an inclusive hate crime law in Utah. ADL recognized Seth's professional excellence by presenting him with the Sen Greenberg Award. Seth earned degrees from UC Berkeley in political science and from Tel Aviv University in international relations. Seth, quite a bio. Welcome to People on the Path. And thank you.
Adam.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. How are you in general? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. But as we sometimes darkly joke at the ADL, things are not so well, so business is very good. So there's a lot for us to be doing in terms of pushing back against hate that's directed against the Jewish community and directed against a number of different communities.
And I'll ask you kind of the same question that I asked the rabbi, and especially in your work, how are you bringing light into the darkness right now, and how in general, as a professional in the work that you're doing, how are you taking care of yourself kind of while combating that hatred kind of perpetually?
Yeah, it's, I think I get a lot of light and I get re-energized by just doing the work that we do. We're all attuned to different forms of hate and ways in which communities are being marginalized. And so when you have an opportunity, as I do through my work, to try to affect change, to try to help people protect their rights, assert their rights, find some sort of remedy, connect with other people, and make sure that they are being made whole again. And that brings me light and inspiration. And in fact, we have a program coming up, and I didn't want to plug necessarily, but there's a program coming up that not only ADL, but federations and a number of other national Jewish organizations are doing starting around Hanukkah, called Shine a Light. And the notion is that we want to shine a light on anti-Semitism, but also on a number of other things that are going on, trying to encourage people to speak up, to stand up for themselves, to find allies, and sort of use that theme of Hanukkah, of shining a light in the face of darkness, as a way of saying we need to do that also when it comes to anti-Semitism.
What is that? How do you participate in that program?
Well, specifically, we've been asking companies to speak out publicly, use social media or other platforms that they might have to address the public, to say that they're aware of and they're concerned about anti-Semitism. So I know that some of the major partners that we've engaged and who are participating in this will be the NFL, the NBA, YouTube, some other major corporate, household names, Coca-Cola, American Airlines, those types of folks. They're also undertaking internal education within the company, support for Jewish employees who may be experiencing discrimination, and also reviewing their own policies to make sure that they're maximally inclusive when it comes to religious observances. Again, not only for their Jewish employees and customers, but for everyone with whom they may interact.
So we just jumped right in to like the thick of what you're doing, and on people on the path. We try to figure out, at least learn about, discover, kind of what led Seth Brisk to okay, not only be doing what you're doing right now, but if your bio alone, like coast to coast, you've been working in professional Jewish realm for your whole professional life, so I want us to go back even further, because your bio only really went as far back as your university degrees. So what we're going to try to do in the next little bit is see what occurred in your younger days that brought you to do these things, to make the choices that you've made professionally, and especially to be involved in an organization like ADL right now, amongst the challenges of our world, right? And you could be doing lots of things. You're a very skilled person, I know you, and you could be doing lots of things. So tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where'd you grow up? What was life like? Wherever you want to start.
Sure. So I grew up in a very sort of idyllic way. I had a really sheltered, privileged childhood growing up, for the most part, in San Diego. But I actually I have a few memories that predate that, and I think that are in some ways influential. So when I was very young, in first grade, I was living in Louisville, Kentucky. So I do remember at that time even experiencing and trying to process and asking questions about ways in which there were some manifestations of segregation that were still going on at the school and the neighborhood and things like that. Our family buying a home in a neighborhood that the neighbors apparently were relieved that we weren't the African American family that was considering buying that house, but also and accepting of the fact that, well, at least it was better that we were Jewish than that we were African American in their eyes. So that was sort of something that my parents shared with me at a very young age, and something that I experienced at a very young age. But then growing up in San Diego, I really had a chance to experience a lot of different things that touched on some of those themes as well. A very decent size and I'd say fairly strong Jewish community, but integrated and assimilated within a broader community. In public schools where there were very active volunteer busing programs So had exposure to kids from other neighborhoods, from other backgrounds. And even my inner circle of friends going through elementary school, high school, was a diverse group of people from, thinking about people who were immigrants, people who had different religious backgrounds, people who had, different socioeconomic experiences. So, I think that both being in a place where I was safe and again, privileged, having a good education, having a good life, and not so concerned about some other things that you might be, and then also being exposed to people from other backgrounds. I think that really had an influence on me. And then as I got older, I've actually thought more about some of the experiences and things that shaped my family, and that I've come to learn and understand. So for instance, my father was a Holocaust refugee. Not something that he talked about a lot when I was very young, but as I got older, came to know more and more of that story. And so, his experience of having been born in Paris, having his first memory be the day that they were rushing just in advance of the Nazis who were moving into Paris and starting to occupy France, and his parents, rushing out and just barely escaping. Something that clearly had an influence on him and an influence on me. And so, some of those things in that deeper sort of family history, I think clearly looking back, especially today, and especially in the work that I do, must have had an influence. And on my mother's side, her father having been a professor, somebody who was interested in teaching and sharing and leading, who was very involved in the community, somebody who worked with refugees, was if you've ever read Ruth Gruber's Haven, he's actually mentioned in Haven. He was an army officer who was trying to help the refugees escape, and somebody who then also went on to teach at Yeshiva University, to lead English and speech there. So that public speaking, that representing, that community leadership, and that giving back, all of those things are sort of very much a part of who I am and who I've become.
I know a lot about you. I did not know about that part of your parents' history. That definitely connects some dots for me, I think, and it's incredible how those young experiences for sure influenced you. And I want to ask how would you say religion or spirituality existed in your home growing up?
Yeah, we were not terribly religious, not terribly religiously observant, but very much aware of and proud of our Judaism. I certainly identified in that way. Growing up at different times, I recall members of my family who were bar bat mitzvahed in a Reform synagogue, in a conservative synagogue. My bar mitzvah actually was done by an Orthodox rabbi. My younger sister had a Reconstructionist synagogue for her bat mitzvah. So, just sort of gives you a flavor of, there was a lot of not a strong commitment to one stream in Judaism or another, and not a strong commitment to necessarily ritual, but certainly involvement and major life cycle events and things like that were very, very important. So, it was an important part of my identity. I mentioned that circle of friends who were very diverse. I was not the only, but I certainly was identified as, in terms of how we viewed identity in those days. I was very much an ethnic Jew. I was very much the Jewish kid, even though I wasn't a kippah wearing kid or a kosher keeping kid, or a shomer mitzvot kid. But I still, that was, part and parcel of who I was. So, I think Judaism was really very important, and especially I think, culturally, and that's really reflective of, again, going back to my parents and their parents, who had that same sort of attitude. Very much. My grandfather never spoke English, but they only spoke Yiddish to each other in the home, no matter where they lived, whether it was in France or or even before then in Poland and in France, in the United States. It Yiddish speaking in the home, and that Jewish culture, that sense of Jewish life was always very central and very important.
Uh, which would you say that Jewish values lived in your home kind of overtly? Was that something that was discussed as part of Jewish identity, and was there specific ones that were where your family kind of stood firmly on?
Yeah, I think I remember my father has always given the same sort of advice as like a toast at each of our weddings for each of my siblings. And so, my sister was married. My oldest sister was married when I was in junior high school. So, dating back at that time, his advice always has been, and he's repeated it in between as well, the same advice that his father gave him, which was be a mensch. And so, sort of menschlichkeit was very much a part of how that was our Judaism, if you will. Mm-hmm. There was a strong commitment to, we know each other from a Zionist youth movement. So there was a strong commitment to that sort of, cultural, communal Jewish identity that you find exemplified in what the state of Israel is. For people who know Israel, have been to Israel before, that most Jews who live in Israel are not religious, but overwhelming majority are not. And yet they're obviously living a very, very rich Jewish life because there's so much else that's going on there. And that was a very comfortable sort of thing for my family, because again, we weren't very religious. And yet the Judaism was very important, and it was important to have it as part of your life in so many different ways. So I'd say probably, if there was that one guiding value principle, it was menschlichkeit, as expressed, it not simply as being a good human being, but really as a Jewish value, and all that entails.
So I'm glad you mentioned the Zionist youth movement that we grew up in together, because I was going to just illuminate for our audience that I met you when I was 14, and I remember it really well. I'll try not to date it, but it was a long time ago.
About 10 years ago, 10 years or so.
and yeah, so that was a part. We met at a summer camp in Three Rivers, Michigan, as part of the Habonim Dror North America youth movement. And tell me a little bit about how you think Habonim influenced where you are and what you're doing these days.
Yeah, I think it had a great influence on me. It taught me, quite a bit in terms of very much some of the skills that I'm still using today in the work that I do. I don't know if you had that sort of slip of the tongue in my introduction, and I don't know if people realize just how funny that is to call me somebody who studied political silence, because silence has never been my problem. So, but I think, that's also something that there was always this sort of oratory for sport, if you will, that was a part of the Habonim experience of being able to, be clever with wordplay, with explaining things, talking about things, arguing about things, joking about things. That kind of experience. There were a lot of those sort of skills, if you will, that I developed there that I still draw upon today. I also think that obviously, the friendships, the people that I met are still some of the deepest and closest friendships that I have to this day. And I think that Habonim also has this had this approach of investing a lot of responsibility in the individual and in the community for one another, which I think is, again, something that manifests in who I am and what I do. And the approach to not very observant reflections of who you are as a Jew, but certainly a close association, an important association, a proud association with your Judaism, with Israel. And also, you know, Habonim, given its political leanings, was also unafraid of saying part of loving something, part of being proud of something, whether that's Judaism or Israel. It is not only accepted, but it's also really, I think, a critical element of that love is to be unafraid of saying, hey, we need to do better. We should improve. We need to stick up for ourselves, but we also need to make sure that how we're doing that is done in accordance with our own values, in accordance with our Jewish history and ethics. So it's sort of, it brings me to, Rabbi Hillel's statement, right? If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So that call to action, that universal and particular messaging, that was very much part of the air we breathed and the water that we swam in when we were at those camps and getting to know each other. And I think it taught me to be, with regard to politics and issues and you grew up very fast there and you became very sophisticated at a very young age. And I think that served me well moving through my career path.
So yeah, as a leader though, I just want to point out that you were the Mazkir of the movement in North America at one point. We worked together at that moment in the central office in New York City. And I certainly was deep into the notion of leadership training, the hadracha that Habonim was bestowing upon us and supporting us to kind of grow into. But I certainly didn't want to be the leader in that same way that you did. So, I mean, you've known for a while that this was part of your path. So tell me, like, just give me a little light onto that moment of like being the leader of a youth movement and how you pulled that off when you were like 23, and if that, and yeah, and it just again like when did you realize that you were a leader?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can point to a specific moment, but it sort of goes back to that sort of notion that silence was never really an option for me. It was also something that I just didn't want to do or be. I always, when we'd have these very sort of democratic meetings that could be about simple things like how we would divide up our candy, or what we would do with our free time, or whatever. And I always wanted to make that speech. I always wanted to be the one to rally the group and say, no, we got to do it this way. And I was really passionate about whatever it was, whether it was Reese's peanut butter cups or swimming at the pool. I mean, I was ready to make that argument and to make that speech and try to get people to follow me along the way. I don't know if that's just because I was so stubborn and determined and selfish that I really wanted to have my way and get other people to support me, or if I don't know if I was tapping into something more, that was more deep about who I am as a leader, or whether I have that leadership within me. I do think, you mentioned hadracha, you mentioned the leadership. Leadership is regularly presented to you as an opportunity in Habonim, even as a camper you're not there as like a consumer, like you are, I think, in some other camps, and no value judgment there. There are ways in which that can be really great to enjoy, just to have those experiences presented to you. But I think part of the value of Habonim that I derived, certainly, and that I was always proud of, is that you had this opportunity to shape the experience yourself. And so I loved that. I loved the opportunity of being able to take that responsibility and help to shape things, and to not be passive. And I think that I always wanted to have that chance. And so I think, I don't know if it was whether it was ego, whether or for more altruistic reasons, that I wanted to be able to be the one speaking and to represent the things. And but for whatever reason, that just really spoke to me, and I took those opportunities whenever they came. And so it just seemed to me, it was always sort of a natural progression to be involved, to stay involved, to move into the next leadership position, and including all the way up to becoming, as you said, the mazkir for all of Habonim in North America.
Excellent. So clearly, Habonim was a teacher of sorts. Your family has been a teacher. Your experiences growing up, what you witnessed, who you spent time with. On people on the path, I also like to give people an opportunity to honor somebody, a specific teacher, perhaps, and maybe it's not someone that you sat in a classroom with, but is there anybody that you want to recognize as kind of your greatest teacher, or someone that you're still learning with, a mentor, who's been uh, really supportive and a part of your ability to do what you're doing?
Oh, wow. It's a great question, and I don't have a great answer for it. I think there's too many people. I mean, I feel like there's other people that I've been studying with or students that I've been teaching that I've learned from, dating back to when I was a Hillel director or even before then. People that I've, who are colleagues from whom I've learned, bosses at work, college professors, teachers from elementary school on up. So many different people have influenced me over time. I don't even know where to begin. I don't know. And I think, it's been, I do feel like I find myself quoting them, even if I don't necessarily give them the citation, so many times in the work that I do, in terms of, taking from that experience, taking from that learning that I gained from them, and then applying it to the things that we're doing today. So
Nobody popped into your head. There wasn't like an image of somebody.
No, I mean, there's just a lot of images that are flashing through, the college professor who taught me to question authority, and the rabbi who worked with in intra-denominational dialogue, who taught me that even though, so I'll just name Yitz Greenberg, who's a Orthodox rabbi, national leader, who taught me that even though he was Orthodox, he had things to learn from rabbis from other denominations, and from other faith leaders from other faith communities. Again, on and on and on.
That's good. We got a name. That
okay, you got a name.
We'll go with Yitz Greenberg. That's a quality mentor and teacher.
Sure.
He has done that with many. And yes, so thank you for thinking that through, and just recognizing that there's a lot of teachers for all of us if we're open to it. I want to ask, what's in a typical day's work for you as hate, anti-Semitism, white supremacy has taken on, I would say, a renewed vigor over the past several months and years? What's in a typical day's work? I mean, you mentioned kind of the light you receive from some of the work, but I can't imagine that every day there's a light experience.
No, because some days, almost every day, we receive an incident report from a community member, from law enforcement, that we find in the media, of something that's going on in the community that we need to address. So we're always encountering those, but immediately the pivot is to, well, what can we do? How do we address this? How do we, try to confront this problem and rise to meet this challenge? There really are no typical days, because there's so much of the work that needs to be done, but also because our work is really varied. So whether it's again, a community member that's come to us and trying to make sure that they understand they're not alone, and that we, to try to give them the tools, the resources, the support that they may need, whether that's, working with elected officials to try to create a law, to create something that will help to protect people, particularly these days, and given where we live, there's a lot of talk about the role that social media can play. And so there's a lot of policy development work that we're doing. We're trying to work as much as we can cooperatively and collaboratively with social media companies to try to get them to do the change themselves, to see the value in it for its own sake, to see the business opportunity that it really represents, that it could be good business for them to be better stewards of their platforms and to make sure that their content isn't harmful. But failing that also sometimes means looking for potentially regulatory or legal avenues to try to find some redress. Working with law enforcement to make sure that they really are protecting and serving the communities that they're meant to protect and serve. But also some of them, are eager to have better skills and better tools to understand what is a hate crime. How do I investigate it? How do I treat somebody who's been targeted by a hate crime? Maybe a little bit differently than I might some other people who are targeted by other forms of crime, because it really is hate crimes are message crimes that are sent against not only that individual, but against an entire community. It's meant to sort of terrorize and marginalize people. And one of the reasons why we have hate crime laws on the books is to say that society rejects that, and we want to send a countervailing message that no, we won't allow for that to happen in our community. You want to think about hatred, you want to have that free expression as a legal expression, that's fine, but you want to break the law and you're going to do it in a way that you're targeting somebody because of who they are, how they look, how they pray, who they love, et cetera, then there's something that there's an additional message there behind the crime. And so there's an additional punishment that should be coming. Working with schools, working with students, teachers, to make sure that they have a welcoming and safe learning environment that includes helping to understand, process, push back against bias that we all have. So on and on and on. There's just so many different things that we do, and then also working in my role, in my capacity, in the administration of it all, whether that's the fundraising or mentoring and guiding and coaching staff members, working with colleagues, learning from colleagues. There's never-ending aspects to the work, and that I think also helps. It's part of the I enjoy learning, and so along the way, as you're trying to address these very deep, dark, heavy subjects, to learn something along the way. That also helps to bring a bit of light, in addition to sort of making progress against the hate itself.
Awesome. I'd love to welcome back Rabbi Ain. He always has some great questions for our guests. And as he said before, he didn't really know much about how you became the Seth Brisk of today. So Rabbi Ain, welcome back. What would you like to ask Seth or talk about with Seth?
Yeah, just a couple of simple, quick follow-ups. What is anti-Semitism?
Simple. Well, look, there are a lot of good definitions for anti-Semitism. First and foremost, it's hatred that's directed against Jews, as individuals, as a community, as a people, as an ethnicity, as a religion, Jewish institutions, Jewish practice, discrimination in any form, bias and bigotry in any form that's directed against Jews as Jews for their identity in its fullest sense as Jews, that's anti-Semitism. And so I think in many respects, that's easy to understand. I think the complexity comes from the notion that Jews are, and hatred against Jews is similar to, but also in some ways very different from, other forms of bias and bigotry, partly because Jews are not only a religion, or Jews are a religion, I would say, in the Western conceptualization, but we're also a people. And therefore, as a people, we enjoy, certain aspects of identity and rights that go along with that identity that are not always necessarily fully appreciated. So that goes into the notion of there are ways in which Israel can enter, or Zionism can enter into the conversation that reflect upon anti-Semitism. So if you're trying to deny Israel, you're trying to deny Zionism, which is Jewish self-determination, which is a right that's afforded to all people. It's a basic principle in international law to say that people have a right to self-determination. Now, that's aside from criticism of Israel, criticism of Israeli policy, Israeli politicians, Israeli actions. That's certainly allowed, and not only allowed, I would say, for people who love Israel, you may particularly want to be doing that to see it become its best self. But there is that way in which people, knowingly or unknowingly, may cross the line and seek to demonize, delegitimize Israel, demonize, delegitimize Jewish self-determination or Zionism. And that then also crosses the line into anti-Semitism. And the last thing I just want to say, just the last thing I want to say is, anti-Semitism, like other forms of hate, takes many different forms and has many gradations. So, being an anti-Semite doesn't mean you're a member of the Nazi Party. There can be passive or even friendly, intense and unintended forms of anti-Semitism where you mean to be good. This notion of the model minority, ascribing certain positive attributes to Jews in a way that you might think is a positive thing, but actually can be seen as another form of discrimination. And again, that's also anti-Semitism.
How do you balance? So I went to law school. I was once a lawyer, and I was once a journalist, and I'm a rabbi. So the First Amendment is really important for me historically. How do you balance freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion with, this notion of hate speech? It's a concern of mine to see the Jewish community turn towards a censorial role. In my opinion, that's never a good look for Jews, telling other people that they can't speak. And I wonder, how do you balance our sort of belief in free speech with the desire to curb real hateful anti-Semitism? I just, like, for me, that must seem like you'd spend 26 hours a day trying to solve that problem.
I think we address the issue a lot. I think for us, there are some clear distinctions, though. Free speech is just that. So free speech includes what some people, and I'm not a lawyer, but free speech includes things that I think people would sometimes categorize as hate speech. There is no legal definition for hate speech.
That's right. That's what concerns me. Like, I grew up with the ACLU in Skokie, right? And for me and a lot of people in, let's just lump the three of us here together, in our generation, for them, that idea that what it means to be a good Jew is to acknowledge that even if we hate it and even if we disagree with it, if it's done in a legal way, you just have to let Nazis march in Skokie. And like, that was so central to my understanding of Jewish ethics. I wonder, how do you balance that out based upon the precarious nature of our current world?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that it's playing out most notably today is with social media. And in that regard, I think, there's something to be kept in mind. On the one hand, as I said, people who express hatred, as long as it's not an incitement to violence, as long as it's not defamation, there are certain ways in which even speech can cross the line into violating the law. But if you're not doing that, what you're doing is you're promoting hate, bigotry, and ugly views. They should be called out as such. And it's incumbent upon different aspects of civil society to do that, whether it's religious leaders, ethnic leaders, elected officials, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to see more of that. And we've seen some ways in which recently society hasn't been doing that, and certain members in society haven't done enough of that. But it's not illegal. It shouldn't be. The government shouldn't be telling you can't say that. Now, sort of the flip side to that is social media companies are not the government. They are private actors. And so when they have hate that's being put up onto their sites as content, whether, videos, memes, tweets, whatever those messages are, they are not compelled to host it and to use it on their site. social media companies did something very early on in their development. They called themselves platforms, and that's a technical term in the computing world. A platform is a way that you have a piece of code that you put into a public space that people can then add onto and amend and build upon. And the notion is that once it's added onto and built upon, it no longer is the owned by the person who put that original piece of code up. And so they consciously called themselves platforms because they wanted to say, well, once you put the content up there, we're not responsible for it. And right now there is a piece of law and regulatory language that says that agrees with that. This is basically the content up there. It's not the responsibility of these providers. But we are seeing, and society is moving to a point where we're saying, well, we're not so sure. I mean, perhaps, and we've been saying for a long time, we can think of it like a newspaper used to be. Like, you can submit a letter to the editor that says that you hate a certain group of people, but the newspaper doesn't have to print that letter. They're not compelled to do that. That's not free speech. You are free to write that, but they don't have to print it. So freedom of speech is not freedom of reach. And there's that distinction, I think, is very important.
It's fascinating. I think I'd love to have you join us for a Wednesday lunch study session, and we'll talk about whether or not these things amount to public utilities today, which would change maybe the valence of that argument. But I really appreciate your answers to these questions and taking the time today. I was sort of course, kidding when I said I had two simple questions. I said, tell me about, what is anti-Semitism, and resolve for me the First Amendment. But I appreciate the work that you've been doing, and it's been good to get to know you over these past couple of months. So thank you for joining us on People on the Path.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Ain. Seth, I want to give you a moment to think about this question, because I don't actually know if this is something that you would do, but I have been asking many of the guests this question: is if there's one sentence that you would say to Jewish leadership of institutions and organizations right now, what would it be?
Wow. Well, I could tell you the thing that leapt into my mind. It's not a sentence, but it's don't be afraid. And I think that applies in so many different directions. I think it's, don't be afraid, more maybe sort of on the surface, don't be afraid in this moment when our community may be being vilified, maybe living through a very difficult period where there's rising and historically high levels of anti-Semitism. Let's not be afraid. I don't think that that's necessarily the message that the leadership needs as much. I do think that the other aspect of don't be afraid that came to my mind when you asked that is this notion of let's not be afraid to speak honestly with each other and with one another and with other communities. I think there are times when we're afraid to talk about difficult subjects, talk about dispelling mythologies or ways in which we're characterizing things. I mean, we talked before about Zionism as a legitimate expression of Jewish self-determination. Self-determination as a principle in international law for any people, it includes Zionism for the Jews. It also includes that for instance, the Palestinians. And so the notion that we, not only is it okay for a Zionist to support Palestinian self-determination, I would say it's incumbent upon Zionists to support Palestinian self-determination. It's a right that we demand for ourselves. We should demand it equally for everyone. So I think, there are times when we have influential members of the community or individuals for whom we can be sometimes reluctant and hesitant to say, no, it's okay, and to explain that and to push back a little bit against, some of the ways in which that fear that's gripping larger society. Jews are part of larger society. We're not immune to it. So there are fears, there are misconceptions, there are misrepresentations, there are conspiracies and outright lies that are circulating in all of society. It's also circulating within the Jewish community at times. And I would say to Jewish leaders, don't be afraid to push back against that too. And to push back against people. I think, in my experience, people appreciate that. And even when they sometimes will continue to disagree with you, they may still hold to their beliefs. They will respect you and they will appreciate you for speaking honestly and directly with them.
I love that I asked you the question for one sentence, and that was the answer. Which again goes perfectly with my slip at the beginning, which
Political
was
silence.
that you were a graduate of political silence. So good. Seth, I really appreciate all you shared today. We're going to jump into what's the People on the Path speed round of questions. I ask each guest most of these questions, some more specific than others, depending on the guest. And I want to start with, are you ready? What are 5 necessities that you must have with you on the path?
Speed round, right? Okay. Let's see. Books, friends, teachers, community, institutions.
Always fascinating to see what each guest comes up with. Thank you for that. What if you could walk the path with anybody? They can be living, they could be past, it could be some person in their future self. Who would you like to walk the path with?
Well, again, rapid. So David Ben-Gurion.
Why?
He led a movement to its successful fruition through very difficult and trying times, and just would love to learn from him about how to get things done, how to balance the practicalities with the principles.
Awesome. You mentioned books as something that you would, as a necessity, and something that has been a teacher over time. Any great book that you would like to mention about that you've read recently, or that's just been resonating with you?
In my line of work, I don't get to read a lot of books. I have to read a lot of articles and reports and things like that. So I don't get to read a lot. Books, nothing really that recently comes to mind. Although I did do a book series recently, Books by the Bay, and I read The Plot Against America, which I thought was a Philip Roth book, which is really interesting and had some interesting parallels to some of the things that are going on in America today.
Nice. Have you a favorite Jewish holiday, and what is it?
My favorite Jewish holiday is Sukkot. Interestingly, I didn't celebrate it a lot, really much at all growing up, but it's just a wonderful holiday, sort of caps off the high holy days. Great way to be with family, with friends, and really sort of take part, and also having spent some time in Israel, to feel that connection to Israel, wherever you are.
And favorite Laker of all times?
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Nice. And the club.
One of the more underrated players, and also, in fact, recently I was on jury duty, and they asked the jury duty questions. One of them said, "Who's your hero? Who's your hero?" And I just, for some reason, he popped in my mind. I put him down. Not only a great player, all-time leading scorer in the NBA, multiple-time champion, MVP, et cetera, but also a civil rights leader. I mean, he to this day continues to speak up and speak out on behalf of so many different things, whether it's the importance of vaccination, to speaking out against anti-Semitism, against all forms of hate. Really just a great man.
Yeah, I do love that he's has a voice that's being respected and heard at this stage of his life, because he's brilliant and wise and beyond an incredible basketball player. I know a club in your golf bag that you have some confidence in at the moment. Any club in there?
Um, not after my last outing, no. I would have said my lofting wedge, but I almost lost it, so never mind.
Seth, last question, and this one's a bit more serious. What do you see ahead of you on the path?
Yeah, I don't know. There's so much uncertainty in this world, and I'm looking for. I see there are a lot of challenges in what we do. I'm looking for those challenges, and to try to do whatever I can to rise to meet those challenges.
Thank you. Anything else you want to share with the community?
No, this has been fun, and I thank you, and I appreciate those who are watching your indulgence of for me to be able to do this. This was, I hope, nearly as much fun and enjoyable for you and enlightening for you as I think it was for me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for allowing us to walk on your path with you today. I'm just going to end off by letting people know that People on the Path is shared on the last Wednesday of each month. Please keep your eyes and ears open for the next edition, which will be available on Wednesday, December 29th. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope this conversation has been valuable and will support your efforts to find your footing and balance as you continue to navigate and blaze your path. One step at a time, I encourage you to walk your path with courage, wonder, curiosity, and an open mind, body, and spirit. I wish everyone shalom and anisya tova along the way, safe travels.